All right, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today into All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day.
Two holidays that are super close together.
Yeah, so close that a lot of people kind of get them confused.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got a ton of historical articles and religious guides, and we really want to uncover the why behind these holidays.
Yeah.
Like, why do we still even celebrate them today?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things is how both of these holidays
Okay.
actually started way back in early Christian practices of remembrance.
Okay, so remembering those who've died.
Right, especially the martyrs.
So thinking about all the saints that there are,
Yeah,
having all those individual feast days must have been a little much.
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine trying to keep track of all of those.
Right.
How do you even fit them all on the calendar?
Exactly.
That's actually how we ended up with All Saints' Day,
Oh, okay.
having just one day to celebrate all of them.
I see. It's just kind of lumping them all together.
It's really amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
Pope Boniface IV actually took the Pantheon,
Oh, wow.
which was originally a Roman temple to, all the Roman gods.
Yeah.
And he consecrated it to honor all Christian saints.
That's a pretty powerful statement, using the Pantheon for that.
It really was like a symbolic shift in power.
Makes you think about all the history that building has seen.
For sure.
Okay, so then later on, was it Pope Gregory III
Yeah.
who moved the date to November 1st?
Yes, in the 8th century.
And so that kind of solidified it.
It gave it a permanent spot on the calendar, yeah.
Okay, so that's how All Saints' Day came to be.
Mm-hmm.
But then how did All Souls' Day fit into all of this?
Well, it's a bit different.
Okay.
All Saints' Day, as we were talking about, is focused on those who are already in heaven.
They've already made it, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But All Souls' Day is all about praying for the souls that are believed to be in purgatory.
Okay, so that's that in-between state in Catholic belief.
Yeah, the place of purification before going to heaven.
Got it.
So it's a day dedicated to praying and interceding for those souls.
It's kind of like lending them a hand on their journey.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, this is super interesting.
It is, and it actually gets even more interesting when you think about how World War I impacted All Souls' Day.
World War I. Really? What does that have to do with All Souls' Day?
Well, think about it. The scale of loss during the war was just massive.
Right, so many lives lost.
The churches were destroyed, families torn apart.
The grief must have been overwhelming.
Absolutely. And so the need to pray and remember those who died became even more urgent.
So what happened? How did the church respond to that?
Well, Pope Benedict V made a really unique decision.
Okay.
He allowed priests to say 3 masses on All Souls' Day.
3.
Yeah, 3. Which was completely unheard of at the time.
Wow, you can almost feel the weight of that decision.
Right. Trying to meet the needs of so many grieving people.
Exactly.
So one mass was for the general intention of the day, another was for all the faithful departed.
And then the third one.
That one was specifically for the Pope's own intentions.
So interesting how that tradition emerged from such a tragic time in history.
And it's stuck around. It's still practiced to this day.
Wow, it's like a living reminder of that collective grief and the power of faith.
Exactly.
It wasn't just about the masses, though, right? I mean, think about all the memorials that were built after the war.
You're right. The National WWI Museum and Memorial, for example.
I like that one.
They become these focal points for expressing grief and honoring the war dead.
It's like All Souls' Day expanded beyond the church walls.
You got it. Those memorials almost become extensions of the holiday itself.
It's fascinating how traditions can evolve like that.
It really is, adapting to new circumstances and taking on new layers of meaning.
But we can't talk about All Saints and All Souls' Day without addressing the elephant in the room.
What's that?
Their connection to pagan traditions.
Oh, right. Of course.
It's no coincidence that they fall around the same time as Halloween.
Exactly. Especially with Halloween having some pretty interesting origins itself.
So let's talk about that.
Okay, so All Saints and All Souls' Day are right around the time of Samhain.
Samhain?
Yeah, the ancient Celtic festival.
Oh, okay.
It was celebrated on October 31st.
Gotcha.
And for the Celts, Samhain marked the end of the harvest season.
So it was a time transition.
Exactly. And they believed that during Samhain, the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest.
I've heard that.
So all sorts of spooky things could happen.
Which makes sense given Halloween's association with ghosts and all that.
Right. So think about it. Costumes, bonfires,
Even trick-or-treating.
all of those things might actually be leftovers from those ancient Celtic beliefs.
It's like this blend of pagan and Christian traditions coming together.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that this idea of honoring the dead and blending traditions, it's not unique to just the Western world.
Really? Tell me more.
Well, for example, you have the Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico.
Right. I love those. So colorful and vibrant.
Exactly. It's all about remembering and celebrating deceased loved ones.
With food offerings, decorations, and all sorts of festivities.
It's really a celebration of life and death.
And then there's Pitru Paksha in Hinduism.
Yeah, it's a 16-day period dedicated to honoring ancestors.
So it seems like this desire to remember those who've passed and connect with the afterlife,
Yeah.
it's a universal human thing.
It really is. That's
How about
probably why these holidays have endured for so long.
even as the specific customs and beliefs have evolved.
Exactly.
Okay, so now I want to know, how are these holidays actually observed in the modern world?
Okay, great question.
Because it's not just about solemn church services, right?
No, not at all. There's a whole range of practices.
So where should we start?
Well, in many Catholic communities, going to Mass on All Saints' Day is a key part of the observance.
Makes sense.
And the readings during the Mass, especially the Beatitudes, they really emphasize those virtues of the saints.
So it's not just about remembering the saints themselves,
No,
but also about embodying those qualities,
exactly. Compassion, humility, righteousness.
striving to be more like them.
Right. And it's not limited to just the church either.
So what else do people do?
Visiting cemeteries, decorating graves with flowers and candles, sharing meals with family.
Especially on All Souls Day.
Yeah, those are all really common practices.
It's so interesting how these traditions kind of mirror what we see in other cultures. Like we were just talking about the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And how families gather in cemeteries, bring food, play music.
Creating this beautiful atmosphere of celebration.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, and in Europe, it's common to bring chrysanthemums to decorate graves on All Saints' Day.
Oh, I love chrysanthemums.
They're beautiful, and they have that association with remembrance.
It's a very visual way to honor the dead, and it's something that you see in so many different places.
It really is.
Speaking of connecting with the past, I came across this diary entry from a YMCA volunteer during World War I.
Oh, wow.
His name was Emile Joseph Palisol, and he was stationed in France at the time. And he wrote about how the French people decorated graves on All Saints' Day,
Interesting.
and he compared it to Memorial Day back in the U.S.
That's such a powerful observation. It really shows how these practices of remembrance transcend borders.
It's like this universal language of grief and honoring those we've lost.
Exactly.
And some of the customs are so unique. Like, did you know that in Austria and Bavaria,
Uh-huh.
godparents give their godchildren these special braided pastries on All Saints' Day?
No, I didn't know that.
They're called Allerheiligenstrezel, and they look so delicious.
Food is so often a part of these traditions.
It's like sharing a meal, even symbolically, bridges the gap between the living and the dead.
It's a beautiful way to think about it.
And it's not just pastries. In Portugal, they have this tradition called Pampardeios.
What's that?
It's where children go door to door receiving treats.
Oh, kind of like trick-or-treating.
Yeah, but with its own unique history and meaning.
I love how those echoes of ancient customs persist.
Me too. And sometimes those customs can be visually spectacular.
Oh, like what?
In Guatemala, they fly these giant colorful kites on All Saints' Day.
Giant kites.
I know, right? Apparently, they're seen as a way to connect with the spirits of the dead, lifting their souls heavenward.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like a beautiful sight.
So we see all these different ways people observe these holidays, from the deeply religious to the more cultural expressions. But that underlying theme seems to be that need to remember, honor, and find meaning in the face of death.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's what makes these holidays so relevant, even in our modern world.
They offer a way for us to grapple with those big questions about life and death and what comes after.
And how we cope with loss.
Exactly. It really makes you think, doesn't it? With all these different ways we remember and honor the dead, what does it say about our understanding of life, loss, and faith?
That's a really profound question.
It is, and it's one that deserves some deeper exploration.
Definitely. And it's a question that each of us has to grapple with in our own way.
For sure, but I think these holidays give us a starting point.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they offer those rituals and beliefs that can help us process those big emotions.
Speaking of rituals, think about how memorials have become these central places for expressing grief and remembering, especially for those lost in war.
Yeah, it's like those memorials, like the National WWI Museum and Memorial. They're almost like extensions of All Souls Day itself.
Right.
They're not just places to be sad, but places to try to understand that huge loss.
And honor the sacrifices that were made.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting. We talk about how All Souls Day is about praying for those in purgatory, but remembering goes beyond just religious beliefs, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Like we have Memorial Day in the U.S., Remembrance Day in other countries.
Right. Setting aside time to remember those who died serving their country, it really taps into that same human need to honor sacrifice.
It's about finding meaning in loss.
Yeah. And even within religious traditions, there's room for individual expression.
Some people might find comfort in prayer, others through music, art, or storytelling.
Exactly. The important thing is that people find ways to process their grief in whatever way works for them
To make sense of it all.
and to hold on to those memories.
And it's not just about those big public commemorations, right? We also have those personal rituals that we create to remember our loved ones.
Oh, absolutely. Things like visiting their grave on their birthday or cooking their favorite meal.
Sharing stories about them with friends and family.
Those little things are so powerful
Keeping those memories alive.
and helping us feel connected to those who are gone.
It makes you realize that these holidays aren't just about one specific day.
It's about how we weave those acts of remembrance into our everyday lives,
Exactly.
shaping how we understand death and loss.
And, you know, what's really fascinating is how much these holidays have changed over
Oh,
time.
yeah, for sure.
How we remember and honor the dead isn't static.
It's always evolving.
That's what's so cool about history and tradition.
It's about seeing how those practices have been shaped by everything, cultural shifts, political events, even personal experiences.
Like, think about how photography changed everything.
Oh, for sure.
Before we had photos, people had to rely on paintings or written descriptions to remember what their loved ones looked like.
And those paintings were often idealized.
Right, it was more about social standing than an accurate likeness.
Exactly.
But then photography came along and made it possible to capture those real moments, those genuine expressions.
You could actually see the essence of a person.
And now with digital technology, we have videos, social media posts.
So many new ways to document and share those memories.
It makes you wonder what future generations will do,
I
right?
know, right?
How will technology continue to change things? And how will our understanding of death evolve?
It's a question we can't answer for sure.
But one thing's for certain.
That human need to remember, to grieve, and find meaning in loss, that's timeless.
Absolutely, and I think that's a perfect segue into talking about how those individual and collective acts of remembrance shape our understanding of life and loss and faith.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, think about
Okay.
the tradition of visiting cemeteries.
hmm
It's not just about tending to the graves, is it?
No, it's about creating a space for remembrance,
Being present with those memories.
a place where we can feel connected to those who are gone.
And that act of going to the cemetery, walking among the headstones, reading the inscriptions, it creates this feeling of connection.
To our loved ones, but also to that whole community of those who have passed.
It reminds us that we're all part of this bigger story.
A story of life and death.
And you know what's interesting? Even the way we design cemeteries has changed over time.
Oh, totally. It reflects how our attitudes towards death have evolved,
Like those early cemeteries, they were often right next to churches.
reinforcing that connection between death and the afterlife.
Yeah, and those early headstones, they were pretty basic.
Just a name and dates. Very simple.
But as societies became more secular, you see those religious symbols fading away.
And more personal touches started to appear.
Things like photographs, poems, symbols reflecting the person's hobbies.
And even the layout of cemeteries became more park-like.
Yeah, with winding paths and benches, creating those spaces for quiet reflection.
It's like cemeteries transformed from just being places of burial into these spaces that invite us to remember and find a solace.
That connection to nature is so important, isn't it?
It really is. It reminds us of the cyclical nature of life and death.
And how even in loss, there's beauty.
It's all about finding that balance.
Acknowledging the pain, but also appreciating the life that was lived.
Exactly.
And it's not just about physical spaces. Think about the power of storytelling in preserving memories.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those family stories, anecdotes, shared memories, they're how we keep the spirit of those who are gone alive.
It's how we transmit values and create that sense of continuity across generations.
And those stories don't have to be these grand, epic tales.
It's often those little everyday moments that reveal the most about a person.
Their personality, their quirks, their unique way of seeing the world.
It's how we really remember who they were.
And it's not just spoken words, right? Music, art, Even objects can be powerful reminders.
Absolutely. A song that takes you back, a painting they made, a piece of jewelry they wore.
They become these vessels for memory.
Holding on to those emotions and experiences.
It's almost like by caring for those objects, we're keeping those memories alive.
It's an act of remembrance in
And
itself.
makes you think, with all these different ways we remember and honor the dead, how do they shape our understanding of life itself?
That's a deep question.
It is. It's like those practices of remembrance. They remind us how precious life is, how important it is to cherish the people we love.
Yeah, and to think about the legacy we'll leave behind.
They also force us to confront our own mortality,
It's inevitable.
to accept that our time is limited.
And by doing that, it can help us to live more intentionally, to appreciate each moment.
It's a reminder that even though death is a part of life, the way we choose to remember and honor those who are gone can have a huge impact on how we live our own lives.
It's really about finding what works for you.
What feels right.
Those rituals, those ways of connecting with the memory of loved ones.
And it's different for everyone, right?
Absolutely. There's no right or wrong way.
As long as it helps you cope and heal.
And find meaning in the face of loss.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From those early beginnings of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day.
To how they've changed over the centuries.
That connection to pagan traditions.
And how people celebrate them all around the world.
From church services to cemetery celebrations.
We even touched on how technology is changing things.
Yeah, and it's all led us to this one big question.
About how these different ways of remembering, they shape how we understand life and loss and faith.
It's a question we want you, the listener, to really think about.
Because the answer isn't something we can just give you.
It's something you have to find on your own.
Through your own experiences and reflections.
Maybe by exploring the traditions of your own family or culture.
It's about taking all this information and applying it to your own life.
And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire you to create your own new rituals of remembrance.
Yeah, maybe you'll want to learn more about those giant kites in Guatemala.
Or bake those allerheiligenstrisol with your family.
The important thing is to find what resonates with you.
What helps you feel connected to those you've lost?
Because these holidays are about more than just a date on the calendar.
They're an invitation to think about life and death.
And how we honor those who've come before us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day,
We'll leave you with this thought. How will you carry those memories forward?
how will you honor those who are gone? And what will your own legacy of remembrance be?
Those are questions worth pondering.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time, keep exploring those big questions.
Keep those memories alive. Every memory's